Hello everyone, and welcome to the wonderful recap of Oz. My name is Justin Peavy, and I will be reading through L. Frank Baum's novels and diving into a few of the countless film, television, stage, and literary adaptations taking place in the magical land of Oz. The original manuscript for L. Frank Baum's 11th Oz book was written in 1915. It had at first been titled Three Girls in Oz, which was criticized by the publishers. They believed it would be mismarketed as an Oz book just for girls, so he came up with the title Adventures in Oz instead. Again, the publishers complained, saying it was an overused title for children's books at the time. Instead, they suggested The Lost Ruler of Oz. Eventually, the title would be slightly altered and finalized as The Lost Princess of Oz, being published in 1917. The development of this book brings about a grim omen. Baum's health started to decline in 1917, but he was known to prioritize other things over his health. He continued to garden, or plan social functions, or provide entertainment for the social group The Uplifters, or write. While writing The Lost Princess of Oz, Baum was diagnosed with gallbladder disease. He worked hard to finish this book and even put off getting proper treatment. This can be referred to as the beginning of his end, as his health continues to decline until he suffers a stroke 2 years later. After Book 11 was published, Baum would write 3 more Oz books. 2 of them would be published posthumously. L. Frank Baum was specifically proud of this book, considering it a return to form for the Oz books. In his author's note, he also acknowledges that the idea for the major plot comes from a letter from an 11-year-old girl, where she wrote, "If Ozma ever got lost or stolen, everybody in Oz would be dreadful sorry." He also encourages children to continue to send him ideas, as these books are as much his as they are theirs. He also was very satisfied with the illustrations by John R. Neal, saying the art contained more humor than some of the more recent installments. I happen to agree with all of these sentiments, but before we get to my thoughts, I have to recap the story of the Lost Princess of Oz. In the heart of the Emerald City, Betsy, Bobbin, and Trot tell their friend Princess Dorothy that they'd like to travel to Munchkin Country. Dorothy decides to ask Ozma if they can take the Sawhorse and the Red Wagon, but is alarmed to find that she is not in her bedchamber. No one has seen her leave the palace, including Jellia Jam and Scraps the Patchwork Girl. Everyone searches the palace grounds but are unable to find their ruler. Betsy recommends that they look in Ozma's magic picture, but tensions rise when they discover that the magic picture has been removed from the wall. Simultaneously, in Quadling Country, Glinda the Good discovers that her great book of records has been stolen. She plans to make a charm that will help her reveal the site of the book, but she finds that all of her magical instruments and potions have also been removed. After an hour of contemplation, she makes a list of things she needs to make new magical compounds from scratch. She dispatches several messengers to retrieve these things. At this time, the Wizard of Oz arrives at Glinda's palace, having ridden on the Sawhorse. He delivers the news that Ozma and her magic picture have gone missing, and is shocked to find that Glinda has also been the victim of a great loss. Meanwhile, in the southwest corner of Winky Country lies a region of Oz inhabited by the Yips. The Yips live at the top of a tall plateau isolated from the rest of Oz. This same morning, Cake the Cookie Cook discovers that her diamond-studded gold dishpan has disappeared. In her troubles, it's recommended that she pay a visit to the Frogman, one of the most peculiar inhabitants of Oz that's believed to be extremely wise. The Frogman was once a normal frog who fell into an enchanted pool where he grew to the size of an average man, learned to walk on his hind legs, and gained a good amount of knowledge. Over the years, the Yips have regarded him as their advisor, counselor, and unofficial leader. Of course, the Frogman isn't any wiser than the average person, but the Yips seem to believe otherwise. Cake consults with the Frogman, who is unsure how to respond to the unfamiliar and complex situation of theft. He suggests that Cake put a proclamation on her door asking for the thief to safely return her dishpan. When this endeavor proves fruitless, she returns to the Frogman for further consultation. He concludes that none of the Yips could be responsible, so Cake must venture out of the country of the Yips to find it. This is something that no Yip has ever done, so the frogman volunteers to accompany her. The next day, Cake, the frogman, and 9 other Yips descend from their land and venture into Oz. After a couple of days, the Yips theorize that the thief must have had the ability to fly, because the terrain they're traveling on is so rough. Another Yip suggests that Cake should just get a new dishpan, which she refuses to comply with. Eventually, they all come to a deep gulf. The Yips decide this is the end of their journey, but the frogman leaps over the gulf with Cake on his back, and they safely land on the other side. The two of them decide to find shelter as night approaches. Frogman and Cake wander into the Winky farmlands the next day and encounter 2 residents named Wilgen and Nellery, who don't have any idea where the dishpan could be. They do, however, recommend visiting the Scarecrow, who has the finest brains in Oz. The frogman is offended that anyone could possibly be wiser than he is, so he deems the 2 Winkies too ignorant and they continue. This is when Cake reveals that she is terrible at baking cookies, and the magic of the ancient dishpan aids her in baking the best cookies in the land. Once the frogman hears this, the urgency of the situation becomes more prevalent, since he loves Cake's cookies. Back in the Emerald City courtyard, Scraps theorizes that someone has kidnapped Ozma. Trot and Dorothy don't believe this, since Ozma is so beloved and so powerful that nobody would dare capture her. The wizard announces that Glinda's record book has been stolen, so he's going to get his bag of magic instruments for her. But he is shocked to find that it too has been taken. He corroborates the fear that Ozma has been stolen before he rides back to inform Glinda what has transpired. Ojo and Button Bright then enter the courtyard and reveal that they've heard the terrible news regarding Ozma's disappearance. For the rest of the day, they discuss what could have possibly happened, believing there is a wicked person in Oz who intends to overtake its ruler. That night, Glinda and the wizard return, and the crew is divided into multiple search parties. Glinda sends Ojo, Unk Nunky, and Dr. Pipt to their native Munchkin country, the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman to Quadling country, the Shaggy Man, his brother who for some reason has no name, Tick-Tock, and Jack Pumpkinhead to Gillikin country, and Dorothy is given the right to form her own party to venture into Winky country. The next morning, everyone sets off in their respective paths. The wizard helps Dorothy prepare her search party, which consists of himself, the Sawhorse, Betsy Bobbin, Trot, Scraps, the Woozy, the Cowardly Lion, Hank the Mule, and Button Bright. Cap'n Bill appears briefly to see them off, and they depart through the city gates. Just after they leave, Toto runs out of Dorothy's room to find that all of his friends are gone. Toto, who I forgot can talk now, asks Jellia Jam where everyone went and decides to run after them. He catches up with them, but he trails behind, nervous that Dorothy may send him home if she sees him. In the Winky country, Dorothy and her search party have no luck obtaining information on Ozma's whereabouts. That night, they find shelter at a shepherd's hut. Toto reveals himself to Dorothy in the morning, and she decides to keep him with her on the journey. Over breakfast, the shepherd warns his visitors that they will be traveling through dangerous parts of the country. This includes the Merry-Go-Round Mountains, the Thistle Eaters, and the Hercules. This only inspires the search party to explore these unknown regions, believing that the more wicked races in Oz would be more likely to have captured their leader. They say goodbye to their kind host and leave the rolling prairie. Later that afternoon, they are in sight of the Merry-Go-Round Mountains, which are shaped like cones and spinning around in both directions. Before the mountains can be reached, it's found that there is a large and deep gulf surrounding them. They're all stumped as to how they can cross the gulf, but the wizard discovers that Dorothy is wearing the magic belt, which she had obtained from the Gnome King many books ago. The problem is that Dorothy still isn't certain how the magic of the belt works. Trot reveals that she is wearing a ring given to her by mermaids which can call for their assistance, but that doesn't prove to be helpful because there's no water anywhere near them. It's Betsy who has the idea to tie a rope to a nearby tree so they can swing over the gulf. Scraps recommends that they unharness the Sawhorse and buckle the harnesses together to make a long rope. Once this is done, Scraps is the first to volunteer to cross the gulf. She successfully makes it to the other side and lands on a mountain. Almost instantaneously, she's whirled away by the mountains and disappears from view. The crew worries about their patchwork friend, but they all follow suit and use the harness to cross the gulf. To their delight, they bound off of each mountain and are thrown to the other side of the region past the range of the merry-go-rounds. The last of the search party to arrive is the wizard, who tied 2 of their blankets to his body since they had to leave the red wagon of supplies behind. When they recover from their dizzy spells, they talk about the other dangers they were warned about. They're concerned about the thistle eaters and the dragons they keep, as well as the Hercules who are supposedly waited on by giants. Regardless, they continue through Winky Country. Eventually, they see a walled city in the distance and begin traveling towards it. When they get closer, they're shocked to find that the city has disappeared. Scraps looks around and finds that the city is now to their left, and they must have gotten distracted along the way and walked in the wrong direction. However, it disappears again as they approach, suddenly being positioned behind them. After chasing the city for a bit, the lion and Hank yell in pain. They have wandered into a field of prickly thistles. What makes matters worse is the fact that the city is now stationed beyond the thistles. They start by laying down both of the wizard's blankets, alternating them as they walk over the thistles, but this proves to be more time-consuming than anything else. Since the thistles can't harm the woozy or the sawhorse, because they have tough exteriors that aren't harmed by thistles, they take turns carrying their friends over the field. Eventually, they're all in front of the city, and their next obstacle is the wall that separates them. There seems to be no entrance anywhere, but Scraps discovers that she can walk through the wall entirely. Now that the wall has been exposed as an illusion, all of her companions follow suit. They find themselves in the streets of the city that kept eluding them, surrounded by the very peculiar residents. The people of this city have heads shaped like diamonds and bodies shaped like hearts. The wizard inquires what the name of the city is, but none of its residents have an answer. They don't call their city anything, it's just where they live. Instead, Dorothy asks if they have a king. They all rule themselves, but they do have a judge that enforces laws, called the High Cockalorum. The inhabitants of this city agree to take their visitors to the judge, and the High Cockalorum allows them to enter his home, except for the animals. The judge explains that the name of their city is Thi, and the residents are called Thists because they only eat thistles. The Thists are not harmed by the prickly plants because their insides are gold-lined. The High Cockalorum also explains that he really is the king of the Thists, but he hasn't told any of his subjects because the stigma of being a monarch may bring him harm and disrespect. In reality, he makes the laws as he sees fit, and just tells the Thists that he is enforcing laws rather than making them. The wizard asks if Ozma is their captive, which the High Cockalorum denies. Trot complains that they've traveled a great distance for nothing, but Scraps reminds her that there is still more land to explore in Winky Country. The High Cockalorum warns them that the Hercules are not very nice people, being incredibly strong and having enslaved giants. But before they leave, the judge decides to give everyone a ride on his dragon-drawn chariot around the city of Thi. He presses a button to summon his chariot, and when it arrives, the visitors are surprised to find that the dragon is only a mechanical contraption that responds to music instead of spoken commands. The slow-moving chariot ride proves to be a very uninteresting one, and when they're offered a dinner of thistles, the wizard announces that he and his party have to leave and continue searching for Ozma. Later that night, they camp out by some bushes and even pick some berries to relieve their hunger. In the middle of the night, Toto starts complaining that he's lost his growl. None of the other animals know what's become of it, and Toto theorizes it's been stolen. The next morning, Scraps leads everyone to a grove of fruitful trees for breakfast. Everyone helps themselves to oranges and apples in this orchard, and they even pack up a few to carry with them on their journey. Trot then discovers that Button Bright has gotten lost, again. Scraps goes to look for the boy while everyone else stays put. Button Bright had wandered around the orchard and stumbled upon a tree that bore only one large peach. He climbs the tree, picks the peach, and starts eating it. It's the tastiest peach he's ever eaten, and is surprised to find that the pit is made of solid gold. He puts it in his pocket so he can show Trot, Betsy, and Dorothy later. Around this time, a bluefinch flies down and informs the boy that he's just eaten the peach that has been enchanted by Ugu the shoemaker. Ugu placed the peach there so nobody could ever find it, and nobody has dared to eat it before Button Bright. A white rabbit also comes along and warns the boy that he may have to face the wrath of Ugu the shoemaker. Scraps finally catches up with the boy and leads him back to the rest of the party. They reach the edge of the orchard by nightfall and camp out under some trees. When everyone is awake, Trot reveals that Scraps and the Sawhorse did some exploring in the night and found another nearby city that is much larger than the city of Thi. They eat their breakfast and proceed. The city is also walled in, but it has several gated entrances. The wizard pounds upon one of the gates, and then a row of giant heads rise above the wall, looking down on the visitors. The giants interrogate them, asking if they've come in war or peace, and then say nobody can enter without the permission of Vig the Sarover. The giants go to alert Vig, and eventually the gate opens. Everyone enters to see 20 giants, all enslaved by the people of this city. They are also surprised to find that the residents are normal-sized, although scrawny people. One of them guides the travelers to see the mighty Vig, calling him the world's most mighty ruler. They enter a palace, walking through several marble corridors before they are in the Sarover's throne room. Vig is shocked to have outsiders entering the city of Hercule, and the wizard announces that they are looking for Princess Ozma. Vig knows nothing about where Ozma could be, saying that watching over his own subjects is hard enough when it comes to their immense strength. The Hercules are so strong that if you gently shake their hands, you could break your arm. The Sarover demonstrates this by breaking a piece of marble off of his own throne and shows his visitors that the marble slab is more than a foot thick. A giant enters, complaining that the cook has burned the soup. The Sarover doesn't like the fact that he's been interrupted, so he grabs the giant by the foot and throws him out the window. Dorothy inquires about the source of the Hercule's strength, and Vig reveals that it is due to his consumable invention called Zozoso. Vig even offers to give a bottle of 6 doses to the wizard, but warns him that the Zozoso must only be consumed 1 teaspoon at a time. He even explains that a man named Ugu the shoemaker had taken 2 teaspoons and it made him too strong. Button Bright, having heard the name of the shoemaker before, asks about him. The Sarover explains that Ugu is an extremely powerful magician that used to live in the city of Hercules, but he has since gone to live in a castle made of wickerwork in the western mountains. Ugu used to be a common citizen before he discovered his great-grandfather's magic books and recipes. Vig theorizes that perhaps Ugu is the person who stole Ozma and the other magical instruments, since he is so ambitious to become the most powerful magician in the world. Dorothy plans to confront Ugu, which Vig advises against. He says it may be too dangerous to conquer the magician, so the wizard decides to look for Ozma at Ugu's castle. If she is there, he shall report it to Glinda and ask her assistance in rescuing the princess. For the rest of the day, they stay in the city of Hercule and head to the western mountains the next morning.
Hi, I'm Karen.
And I'm Colleen.
And this is Books
Movies
and Musicals.
Oh my! Come join us as we discuss our favorite childhood stories in analytical and honest ways.
Most recently, we've been discussing Harry Potter and Disney princesses.
We have so many more ideas and we can't wait to go through them with you.
So, keep it magical.
And leave a little magic wherever you go. Bye!
On the same morning that Dorothy's search party leaves the city of Hercule, Cake and the frogman are asleep on beds of leaves. The frogman wakes up and looks for some breakfast. He stumbles across a Winky woman gathering some sticks for a fire and asks her for some food. She doesn't care about the frogman's social status and refuses to let his privilege persuade her to offer some food. The insulted frog walks away, eventually finding a pond. He decides to go for a swim, but he makes a terrible discovery after he had been swimming for some time. An engraving explains that this is the truth pond, and whoever bathes in it must tell the truth until the end of their days. The frogman leaps out of the pool, devastated that he can no longer keep up the charade of being the wisest creature in the world. He travels back to the grove and finds Cake. He confesses the truth to her, shattering one of her most pleasing illusions. She calls him foolish to have swam in the truth pond, saying that it is often very embarrassing to tell the truth. The frogman asks Cake if she will bathe in the truth pond, just so he knows that they are both being completely honest with each other, but Cake refuses. When they leave the grove, they stop at a nearby Winky house. The woman living there recommends that they travel east towards the Emerald City, where they can be better assisted by Ozma. They thank the woman and they head east, where they arrive at the Winky River. There they find a ferryman, alone in a little yellow house. The frogman tries to speak to him, but the man doesn't respond. Cake then grabs the ferryman's attention, and it's revealed that the ferryman didn't respond to the frogman because he isn't acquainted with the frog language. Cake is confused by this before the ferryman explains that he was punished by the Tin Woodman, Emperor of the Winkies, for mistreating animals. To clarify, the man took some birds' eggs to make an omelet and also went fishing once. So now, the ferryman is unable to understand any creatures. Instead of clear speech, he instead hears their natural sounds. The ferryman offers some food and allows Cake to sleep in his cottage. He refuses to allow the frogman into his home because the frog's presence makes him miserable and unhappy. The ferryman rows Cake and the frogman across the river the next day, and the two of them continue along this rarely traveled area of the Winky Country. Suddenly a voice cries, "Halt!" and they find themselves in the presence of a small stuffed bear carrying a pop gun. He announces that Cake and the frogman are now his prisoners, having trespassed into Bear Center. It's a city of hundreds of stuffed bears, all ruled by a sorcerer known as the Lavender Bear. The two must be arrested, tried, and executed. Once they finish marching to Bear Center, the small bear fires his pop gun as a signal, and several more bears emerge from the trees. Their captor, now referred to as Corporal Waddle, informs his fellow stuffed bears about the intruders. Cake and the frogman are closed in by a bear regiment, and before they know it, the Lavender Bear makes himself known. The Lavender Bear demands to know the reason for their intrusion, but the harmless visitors explain that they are traveling to the Emerald City to find Cake's dishpan. The frogman wins the Lavender Bear's favor with his blunt honesty, and the bear uses magic to show Cake her dishpan. She tries to reach for it, but it's only an illusion. None of the bears have seen the dishpan before, so the king summons the little pink bear. The pink bear, who happens to have a crank in his side, is carried to the Lavender Bear. The king cranks him up and asks where Cake's dishpan is. The pink bear announces that Ugu the shoemaker has it in his castle, 19 miles northeast of Bear Center. The Lavender Bear promises this information is accurate, since the pink bear has never been wrong about anything before. The Lavender Bear then uses magic to present the image of Ugu the shoemaker to Cake and the frogman. The old skinny man is seated at a wicker table, reading Glinda's Great Book of Records. The frogman asks if they can borrow the pink bear for guidance on their journey to conquer Ugu. The king is nervous to let the pink bear out of his sight, so he decides to travel with them as well. 2 days later, the path of the frogman, Cake, and the lavender and pink bears converges with Dorothy's search party. The first members of the parties to meet are Scraps and the frogman. They both learn about each other's objectives to retrieve what has been stolen from them by Ugu the shoemaker. Scraps introduces the frogman to her friends, and the wizard decides it would be best to combine the two search parties. The Lavender Bear tells Dorothy and the wizard about the vision he had of Ugu, and the wizard is concerned that the magician is following their adventures in Glinda's book. The king decides to wave his wand and show everyone what the magician is doing. The image reveals that Ugu is already looking at the search party in Ozma's magic picture. This creates an infinite picture-in-picture effect which alerts Ugu that he too is being watched. Ugu turns and scowls in their direction before the Lavender Bear's vision fades away. The wizard thinks of how they can conquer the magician, who has only been made more powerful with the magical tools he's stolen. The Lavender Bear asks the Pink Bear what has become of Ozma, to which he responds that Ozma was shut up in a dark place. This horrifies her loyal subjects, who realize it's important to band together now more than ever. They can't take Ugu by surprise, so they have to conquer him by force, despite the Ozite's pacifistic nature. Cake recommends consulting with the Frogman because of his great wisdom, but the Frogman is forced to think rationally without his superior facade. They all decide to travel to Ugu's castle regardless, and refuse to show him mercy until Ozma is freed. As they are about to travel to Ugu's castle, they find that Button Bright has gotten lost again. This doesn't concern anyone since the boy always gets found. It's already been established that Ugu had been a shoemaker in his early days before he found his ancestors' magic books. But ever since he found them, he aspired to be the greatest magician in Oz. He learned about all of Oz's magical instruments from his ancestors' books, so he planned to seize them in order to become the most powerful person in all the land. After he built his wicker castle, he stole Cake's dishpan while the Yips were asleep. Using a magic word, he was able to make the dishpan grow to the size of a bathtub. He climbed inside and wished to be in Glinda's laboratory. He was taken there immediately, where he stored all of her magic compounds and the Great Book of Records in the pan. He then wished to be in Ozma's palace, where he put the wizard's bag of magic tools and Ozma's picture into the pan. While he took these things, he was spotted by Ozma, so he tied her up, threw her into the pan, and then wished to be back in his own castle. Ozma was then locked in a room and made his prisoner while he unpacked his stolen goods. Eventually, Ozma became too bothersome, so he placed a spell on her that rendered her neither seen nor heard. Of course, tensions rose when he discovered that 2 search parties from different areas of Oz were on their way to his wicker castle to overtake him. As the travelers approach the wicker castle, Toto theorizes that Ugu may have also stolen Button Bright and his growl. They camp out for the night and make an early start the next morning. They reach Ugu's castle within an hour. The Bear King asks the Pink Bear where Ozma is, and he announces that she is in a hole in the ground half a mile to their left. They decide to rescue Ozma before they continue their journey, so they march for half a mile. They eventually find the hole in the ground, and they are surprised to find that Button Bright is at the bottom. Dorothy calls down to him asking where Ozma is, but the boy hasn't seen her. This forces them to pass judgment on the Pink Bear, who appears to be wrong for the first time. They all help Button Bright out of the hole and look again to see if Ozma is hidden there. Dorothy asks the Pink Bear if Ozma is really in the hole. The Pink Bear says no, claiming she is among their party now. This really perplexes the group. Theories are tossed around claiming that Button Bright is Ozma, or Ozma is invisible. It appears as if the only way to rescue Ozma is to find out from Ugu how they can find her. As they climb the hill leading to the castle, they are suddenly surrounded by a circle of flame. The wizard immediately recognizes this as one of Glinda's tricks, so he takes a match, thrusts it into the fire, and the illusion disappears. Then they are stopped by a wall of steel, covered in sharp daggers. The wizard explains the only way to remove this trick is to get on the other side of it. The frogman leaps over the wall, carrying a pin, then sticks it in the other side of the wall, which vanishes. Out of the castle gates marches a large regiment of female soldiers with spears and axes. This is yet another trick that the wizard recognizes, all of the soldiers being optical illusions. Once everyone has entered the wicker castle gates, they arrive in a courtyard where a peacock calls them poor fools. They enter the castle itself, walking through several zigzag passages until they reach a domed hall. There they see Glinda's Great Book of Records chained to a table, Ozma's magic picture hung on the wall, and all the instruments stolen from Glinda, Ozma, and the wizard are on shelves. Ugu the shoemaker is waiting for them in the room, smoking a pipe. He is locked in a golden cage, and at his feet is the cookie cook's dishpan. Ugu is confident that he can easily overtake the trespassers, and he refuses to reveal where Ozma has been hidden. Despite the fact that the frogman was given a dose of Zozoso, they are unsure how they will conquer the magician. While they ponder this, the room begins to rotate, and everyone slides on the floor, then onto the walls, and then onto the ceiling. Ugu is kept in place by his golden cage, and escapes through a trapdoor. They try to reach the magical compounds by standing on each other's shoulders until someone can reach. However, the room is too tall for this to work. It's at this time that Dorothy reveals that she has been secretly testing the powers of the Gnome King's magic belt. The belt can perform transformations, but it can also grant its wearer one wish per day, so she wishes for the room to rotate until it's back to normal. Ugu reappears in the golden cage, angry that his prisoners could reverse this spell. Dorothy advances towards him, but he puts up a wall of glass to separate himself. She then uses the magic belt to transform the magician into an extremely large dove. Ugu then flies towards Dorothy to attack her, but she's unafraid because the magic of the belt will protect her from harm. The frogman doesn't realize that is the case, so he leaps onto the dove's back. The frogman's strength is able to distract Ugu long enough for Dorothy to transform him into a normal-sized dove. Ugu, knowing he can't oppose the magic belt, flies into the dishpan, utters a magic word to himself, and is transported to Quadling Country. Everyone is happy that the magician has been conquered, except for Cake, who still hasn't rescued her dishpan. Trot and Betsy decide to look in Ozma's magic picture and Glinda's Book of Records to see where Ugu has gone. Dorothy knows the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman are in Quadling Country searching for Ozma, and they will surely find Cake's dishpan. Button Bright then remembers they have to look for Ozma, so they ask the magic picture to show them where she is. All they see is a round black spot in the center of the frame. They ponder this for a while before they ask the Pink Bear where Ozma is. He announces that Ozma is in the same room as them. The wizard asks for specification, and the bear states that she is in Button Bright's pocket. The boy empties his pocket and finds the golden peach pit, which he had forgotten all about. The wizard pries it open with a pocket knife, and a cloud-like haze fills the room. When the cloud clears, Ozma is standing before them. While everyone is delighted to have rescued their ruler, Toto is also glad to find that his growl has been restored. Ozma is informed about the conquest of Ugu the Shoemaker, and she thanks their newer companions for their assistance. She also promises that Cake's dishpan will be restored once they're in the Emerald City. For the next 3 days, they pack up the magical instruments as well as any magical things left behind by Ugu and his ancestors. Dorothy decides to maintain Ugu's dove form until he reforms and becomes an honest shoemaker, like he once was. There is a large week-long celebration in the Emerald City that comes with Ozma's safe return. Glinda was waiting for them there and was glad to have her things back. Every stolen object is returned to its rightful owner except for that of the dishpan, which is yet to be recovered. Meanwhile, Ugu the Dove sits upon a tree in Quadling Country, sad with his transformation, until the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman stroll by. They discover the dishpan at the bottom of the tree and decide to carry it back to the Emerald City. After they hear the news that Ozma is found, they hurry back to the Emerald City and present the dishpan to Ozma. Ozma promptly hands it over to Cake the Cookie Cook, who is finally relieved of her worries. Several weeks later, a gray dove flies into the Emerald City's royal gardens and lands before Dorothy, Trot, and Betsy. He reveals himself to be Ugu the Shoemaker, and he apologizes for his wicked actions. He begs for Dorothy's forgiveness, and she offers to return him to his true form, but he refuses this. All he wants is forgiveness, and he chooses to live his life as a content and independent bird. Dorothy wholeheartedly forgives him before the dove flies away. This book surprised me in many ways. I had heard about its basic premise from a friend of mine, so I was excited about the mystery aspect. However, given the nature of the Oz books in the past, I didn't expect very high stakes, but I was wrong. There were some pretty tense moments in here, and I think that can be credited to the fact that nearly every tool they've used to solve their problems in the past has been removed from the narrative. It forced the characters into an unfamiliar position, and it was extremely interesting to see them try and figure it all out. I will admit, I was sort of expecting a bit of a cop-out ending here. I was expecting Ozma to emerge safe and sound and announcing that she probably just needed a vacation or a week off of ruling the land of Oz, and that's why she disappeared and took all of her magic instruments with her so that no one could find her, but I was very happy to find that there was an actual antagonist in this story. And there were some moments of this book that were actually chilling. The imagery of them using the Lavender Bear's powers to look at Ugu, only to find that Ugu is already watching them, is something straight out of a scary movie or a crime thriller. From the get-go, stakes are high. It doesn't waste any time getting to the main conflict, which I really enjoyed. And aside from the first Oz book, this one seemed the most grounded in the fairy tale genre. It's hard to explain, but it just feels like it fits into that category more than the previous installments, and it made the writing feel more fresh. I will also admit, I didn't see the Peach Pit plot twist coming. Just like Button Bright only 5 minutes after he stuffed the pit in his pocket, I had totally forgotten about it. One of my favorite aspects of this book is the fact that the villain doesn't realize he's even the villain. He's even described in the book as someone who doesn't think he's a wicked man, he just thinks he's ambitious, which is an interesting dynamic for an Oz villain. I have 2 minor criticisms for this book. Toto's missing growl subplot was unnecessary and sorta confusing. I don't know exactly where his growl went, or how he got it back, or if it was even lost in the first place. I also felt like there was a lot going on at times, and I think that has to do with an overload of characters. By the time they reach Ugu's castle, the party consists of Dorothy, Trot, Betsy, the Wizard, Scraps, the Lavender Bear, the Pink Bear, the Cowardly Lion, Toto, the Woozy, the Sawhorse, Hank, Button Bright, the Frogman, and Cake. At times, one of them would talk and I would have completely forgotten they were even a part of this story otherwise. Reducing the cast of this one may have been a smart idea, but other than that, this one might be one of my favorites so far. It does feel like a return to form for the Oz books while still having enough freshness to keep it interesting. It makes me sad that after this one, I only have 3 more of Baum's Oz books to read, but if we continue on this trend, I'm sure the last 3 will be wonderful. As always, here are my favorite quotes. Some of them are funnier than others. I usually save this last bit for the little bits of wisdom thrown into the books, but I just couldn't resist. Here they are. It must be dreadful to be stuffed full of wisdom. It is my good fortune to know very little. Said by Wilgin the Winky. Those who are contented have nothing to regret and nothing more to wish for. Said by the Wizard of Oz. Any boy who causes his friends so much worry isn't worth having around. Said by Hank the Mule. Only those things one acquires honestly are able to render one content. Said by Ugu the Shoemaker. Thank you again for listening in. If you have any interest in supporting the podcast, you can visit anchor.fm/OzRecap. I hope to create some video companions to some of these episodes in the future, and becoming a supporter would help me better create content for my fellow Oz fans. If you are interested in reading the Oz series along with me, all of Baum's novels are in the public domain and available online for free. They're easy to read, and the illustrations alone are so interesting to behold. You are now all members of my Oz book club. Sorry, I don't make the rules. Well, that's all I've got. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at OzRecap for updates and more Oz content. Until next time, I'm Justin, and this has been the wonderful recap of Oz.